Underactive and overactive muscles, probably the most frustrating and challenging thing for so many people like you to learn as you're going through the NASM material, you're trying to get certified, and honestly, you're just wanting to become a great coach and trainer, right? This concept of underactive and overactive can be really useful if you can get it to click. But probably for most of you, anatomy might be new, or at least the muscular anatomy, and now you're trying to learn it in context to muscles that might be contracting too much or they're not contracting enough. It's a lot. So first off, I get it. And the unfortunate part is that the method in which most of you guys are learning this information is exactly what's holding you back. And so what I want to give you guys in this video is a superpower, right? A little unlock, a level up in your studies in general. It's definitely going to help you learn the overactive and underactive better, but you could use this literally to learn anything better. I didn't realize that this was one of my study methods in college, but as I look back now, and I've spent a lot of time working with individuals on better learning methods, you know, how do we solidify things to our long-term memory, study tips and hacks and other things. And the biggest missing thing for most of you guys is context. Context. You're trying to memorize 1,000 pages of information by just reading it from a textbook, or maybe even from watching great videos like the ones that we have here. And I hope that some of them have served you. That's the entire idea behind our YouTube channel, is trying to add more context to the stuff that you guys are learning. I was lucky. I got some of this stuff. I had some great mentors who were helping me in the beginning, but I know many of you guys don't have that. And so when I say context, I mean situations, explanations, relationships to other things in your life that give more meaning to something, right? As you guys are sitting there trying to memorize the underactive and overactive overhead squat solutions table, just by itself, it's really hard for it to stick. You gotta think about your brain and the way that it was designed, right? It's not designed to keep every aspect, every piece of little information throughout your lives. It's smart at deleting things it doesn't need and keeping the things that it needs. So if you want your brain to remember these things, you gotta give it more reason to remember them. And that reason is context. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take you guys through 3 specific things you can do to add more context to your studies and hopefully better learn the underactive and overactive muscles. So if context is the missing element, if it's the key to learning anything, which I really believe that it is, how do we go about doing it, especially with the overhead squat, the assessments, and the underactive and overactive muscles? Because there's no doubt you guys are gonna get questions on these. And again, I'm a big believer, if you can figure out how to apply and use the information, it's super valuable. Those students that are in courses like ours, it's a lot of what we do are bringing the information to life. But for you guys, things that you can do on your own, and you really should after watching this video, and I'm gonna go through and give you guys some very specific examples so you have a good idea. First, we gotta spend time acting it out, right? You gotta get over feeling weird, goofy in the gym with others, whatever. You gotta get up and move and do this stuff. Because I know if you got into, or you're trying to get into, personal training, you're probably like me, you're probably a pretty good visual learner, right? Like if I were to show you to do something and then we explain it that way, it's gonna be like, okay, I get it. Versus I'm just looking at a textbook. Or maybe even I'm watching a video, but I'm not doing it. You gotta do these things. So I'm gonna give you guys some ideas and examples, act it out. We also gotta connect the dots. I believe you've gotta take what you're learning and you're trying to do in the assessments, and you've gotta connect it to exercises that are already in your brain. Because here's a huge key, guys, when we talk about creating these relationships and learning information, is you already have neural connections between exercises like shoulder presses, like squats, lunges, other things that you're doing. And so if we can add this new information and connect it to something that you already know and that you do, then literally the neural connections are gonna be stronger. We already have that information in our brain, and so it's gonna be easier for us to say, okay, now it makes sense. And it's also meaningful to you. And things that are more meaningful, you're more likely to remember. And then the last piece, we gotta make you the teacher. You gotta do what I'm doing, because I can tell you it's the only reason I know this stuff so well. So first one, act it out. And I wanna give you guys a real specific one, a couple of examples, because I wanna make sure you walk away with better knowledge of overactive and underactive muscles with this new learning method in mind. So as you guys look at your overhead squat solutions table, and let's say we look at one of our checkpoints as you guys are looking at the overhead squat. I'm gonna get real specific with our NASM material. Someone goes into the overhead squat, one of our anterior view checkpoints is the knees. What's happening with the knees? And let's just say you guys get a question, or better yet, a client or yourself, and as they're doing the assessment, the knees cave in, whether it's one or both. All right, now the problem with our normal route of studying, what you might be doing right now, is you're trying to just recall that chart in your brain. And some of you are lucky. Maybe you're that type of learner where like you can see your learning material in your brain while you're answering a question, which is okay, it's good, but it's still not as good as being able to see someone do it in real life and now have it click. And so what we gotta do, we gotta act it out, right? You gotta act it out. Because in your mind, you're like, well, I remember on the chart, the adductors, you know, and that one is the overactive, but what's the underactive? And so I think acting these things out are gonna be helpful. If the knees, right, if you're doing it, and even if you're watching the video, stand up, get some practice. If you're doing it, you're acting it out, and the knees cave in, here's your problem solving process, guys. You gotta think about, especially with our overactive muscles. Overactive, too much signal. You might think of that as tight, right? It's a muscle that might be working too much. So your thought process is, if the knees are caving in for overactive, what could be pulling it in? Like what muscle would actually bring the knee in? And so as you start to think about it like that while you're acting it out, we're like, okay, well, if it's pulling in, that means it literally has to be a muscle that's on this side of the leg, if it's contracting. Because if I was contracting a muscle on this side of my leg, right, the outside of my body, the lateral portion, physically it couldn't really pull it in. So there's a little bit of just standing up physical problem solving that can be really helpful while you're trying to memorize the charts, right? Because now all of a sudden you're like, okay, well I get it. Well, my knees are caved in, or even if they don't, let me just put them in like that. And then what if I wanted my knees to go the other way? All right, let me think about it. Let me just drive my knees out. And then as you do that, right, this is the acted out. This is where we're creating the connection to what you're feeling, right? This is what's going to translate into you remembering and using it. You can feel, as I drive my knees out, all of a sudden I'm like, what's this muscle right here? You guys can say it out loud. Glute medius, your glutes. All of a sudden when I drive the knees out, I can feel my glutes engaged, okay? So that would be the idea, like, okay, if I drive the knees out, maybe that muscle isn't working enough to hold me in position. So here's the problem solving of overactive, underactive. And so some of that, as you guys are trying to learn the anatomy, I know you're visual, right? Most great trainers are. So do these things while you're trying to learn it and feel the muscles that are working. If I drive my knees out, what do I feel engaged? All right, my glutes, my glute medius. And it might take you a while. I'm gonna tell you guys, it's not all of a sudden like some sort of 10-second hack, putting time into acting these things out and practicing it. But you wanna be great at it when it comes game time, working with clients, this is the best thing that you guys can do. So a couple ways you guys can act it out is literally as you're studying the material, you're going through the charts, go through each individual checkpoint, feel what it feels like to be in the wrong position versus what it feels like to be in the right position, and then try to start to problem solve, well, like what muscles are over here? Okay, glute medius. And you're gonna be able to start to triangulate that with the overhead squat solutions chart. But it's just this idea of act it out, spend time up on your feet with the textbook nearby, maybe recording yourself with all these different moves, and it's 100% gonna help you guys, right? Rather than spending so much time just trying to memorize the book, get up, act it out. And you can apply this with probably anything else inside the material as well, especially as you get into other chapters like SAQ, plyometrics, core. If you want all the things that you're learning, even the different exercises, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 training that are mentioned in those chapters, you got to act it out. Because then all of a sudden those questions are going to come up on the exam, and you're not going to come back and necessarily think about what's on the page in your textbook, but you're going to think about the exercises you were doing and what it felt like. And for most of you guys, it's going to be a much better way of learning. So the next one, which kind of builds off this, is you need to figure out ways to connect the dots. For example, with the arms falling forward, with the knees caving in, right? With the torso falling forward. What other exercises does that stuff start to come into play with, right? Like breaking it down, connecting the dots to the exercises you're doing in the gym. To me, this is also the practical benefit of doing the assessments. Not only will it help you learn, you know, we talked about the arms falling forward during the overhead squat. Well, that becomes pretty relevant with things like lat pull downs or like overhead presses. So in those exercises, what's happening? Again, this is like, let's call it the next layer of thinking that takes a little bit of time, but this is the stuff that you can actually start to think about while you're working out in the gym. I mentioned at the very beginning of the video that this idea of adding context to studying or learning new information, I didn't realize I was doing, right? I was doing it by accident. I gotta talk about, I was skipping classes a lot in college. I'm not gonna lie. I did really well in classes, but I was skipping class to come work out, right? Because I was working, I was training clients, and I was taking classes. And so I would say, hey, you know what? I don't need to go to this extra anatomy lab. I'm gonna come think about my muscles and what plane of motion they're moving in and what joint motion they're doing while I'm doing exercises. And for me, it was a game changer. Studying became very easy and a lot more fun that way. So for you guys too, connect the dots. Try to think about the overactive and underactive muscles and the muscles that are engaged, joint motions, all the stuff that might be boring on its own to learn. But if you can connect it into the workouts that you're doing while you're working out thinking about it, it's gonna be a game changer for you. It might impact your workouts a little bit, right? You might be distracted, you might take longer. That's okay, because that's in the end the goal of what we're trying to accomplish. So connecting the dots, right? Being able to think about those things. And then the last one that I think kind of ties these first two together is somewhere along the way, even if you're in the middle of nowhere right now, right? I have conversations with some of you guys that are in like remote cities and locations in different countries, and maybe you're not studying with a lot of other people, or you don't have other people in your life who are even into health and fitness. You know, it's the reality you might have. You got to find a way to teach other people, right? This is a lot of what we do inside of our courses here. You know, when we do our in-person courses in South Florida, it also plays an element into our virtual classroom where we have students engaging with one another. We're asking questions. We're trying to draw more out of you specifically. But even for you, if we're talking about the assessments and the overactive and underactive, not only do you need to do it on yourself quite a bit, you need to practice it, you need to feel it, you need to think about those things in the gym when you're working out on your own, and then you need to take other people through it. Right? If you want to do really well on the exam, and again, this is taking information from our students who do the best inside of their courses, and they tend to practice the most on other people as well. Practice on your husband, your wife, your kids, your friends' friends, whatever it is. Practice the assessments, not just doing them, right? Recording them, but then actually explaining to the person that you're with what you're finding. It's okay if it's a little clunky in the beginning, it's going to be. Right? I'm sure if I went back to me doing this in the beginning, it wasn't great. It wasn't what you're seeing here on camera right now, but you'll get there. So spend time teaching other people, specifically with the overactive and underactive. I think take more people through the assessments, force yourself, challenge yourself to try to explain what it is that you're finding, what it is that you're seeing. That's going to be helpful. It's also going to give you a lot of confidence when it comes to working in person with people. And then in general, as you guys are going through the content, even if it's not someone else who's studying the NASM material, but someone else in your life who just might be interested in health and fitness, spend time and say, hey, can I spend a little time and just teach you some of these concepts and get your feedback. It's gonna get you practice breaking it down simply. It's also gonna force you to prepare in a different way, which again, I believe adds more context to what you're doing. So I just wanted to give you guys this because I want you guys to succeed in this process, not just with getting certified, but actually getting on and training more clients. And for a lot of you guys, you may be studying on your own, you're watching a lot of YouTube videos, you're spending a ton of time reading the textbook, and you feel like you're not learning anything. And sometimes it's not that you're not putting the time and the effort, you're just not spending time on the right stuff. So try to put a little bit more time and energy into saying, you know what, how can I add more context to what I'm learning, especially with the overactive and underactive? I promise you it's gonna help it click, and you're gonna dominate the exam. Hey, if you like the idea of adding more context to your studies and what you're learning, even beyond the overactive and underactive muscles, make sure you check out the link below. We've given you guys 100% free access to our entire virtual classroom for 7 days. This is over 40 hours of video breakdown of every concept in the material, additional quizzes and practicals, just to help you guys in your process of studying and learning everything inside the NASM. So if you want more access and information about this trial, check out the link below.